All right, what about now? Am I doing better? Awesome, thank you. All right, that was like 5 minutes of talking. Okay, all right, so again, I'll sort of start over. Welcome to ESI 5937, Modeling Fanaticism Using Advanced Industrial Engineering Techniques. So I'm the professor, Professor Vella. I'm actually a professor in the Industrial Engineering department. My background is in operations research, and usually I'm applying it to air transportation systems. So I do a lot of modeling and simulation and optimization. And as part of that, I usually use a lot of machine learning techniques and statistical learning techniques in order to build up models and simulations or to optimize, right? So what I wanted to do before we sort of get started with the class and some of the lecture material is to get a little bit more familiar with the folks that are taking the class, so you all, the students. And so what I'd like to do is get an understanding of what everybody's academic background is. So I know we have some industrial engineers, I know we have some computer science folks, I know we have some grad students, and I know we have some undergrads. We probably have some folks who have done lots of machine learning, like Shahab here. I know he's done quite a bit of that and has gone through all the course load. And we have some folks who have done none, right? And I also expect sort of a variety of programming background and background working with databases. So what I'd like to do is if you could just, we'll go through one by one. If you could unmute yourself, give your name, I guess major, whether you're grad or undergrad, and give me some idea of what your capabilities are when it comes to like programming, machine learning, and working with database systems. And so we'll sort of start in order that I see you guys. And so the first person on this list is William. William, if you could sort of do a quick introduction, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
All right, awesome. So hi, I'm Will. So my background is I'm a grad student going for a master's in computer science. I've already taken the machine learning course here at UCF, the grad version. So I do know quite a bit more about machine learning than maybe I would if I didn't. As far as database experience goes, one of my last positions was working with Disney and costuming and working with their costuming database. So I'm pretty well versed in database operations and techniques. Was that it?
Yeah, actually that's perfect. Cool. Yeah, so let me ask, were you guys, most of your work with databases, did they provide the front end, or were you logging it into like, some sort of MySQL?
It was with MySQL, yeah.
MySQL, okay, cool. Yeah, so we're actually gonna be using MongoDB throughout this class, but pretty similar. Some of the syntax is weird, but I think the thought process is still pretty much the same. So
Okay,
could be bad. And of course, we'll learn all that. I think that's sort of one of the goals of the class. Alrighty, so next up we have Brian. Brian, if you could unmute yourself and sort of give me an idea of your background and stuff.
Yep. Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Brian. I'm doing a master's in computer science at the moment with specialization in machine learning. So I've done a good amount of machine learning, have some software engineering skills. So definitely a background in data science, databases and data science. Also doing machine learning, but slowly but surely moving more into modeling and simulation. So that's why I picked this class.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm happy to see that folks are coming in with the machine learning background. And, I'll sort of talk, this will be a little bit of a different but similar class. So I think everybody's going to sort of walk away with something. So certainly there will be parts where you go, oh, I know this. And that's fine. That's great, right? If you already know the material, then that makes life so much easier. But if you don't, then sort of learn along together. So sort of coming into this, I expect sort of a wide diversity of everybody. So, all right, Shahab.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shahab. I'm PhD candidate at Department of Industrial Engineering. and my PhD research is focused on application of machine learning, stochastic process, and statistical analysis in educational context. And we have a data set collected by institutional knowledge management, which has information for a student at UCF.
Cool. All right. So I know Shahab really well because he's actually one of my graduate students. So, you know, I don't need to bother him too much. He knows everything about databases, and I know he knows a lot of machine learning. So, all right. So next up, we have Jordan on my list. Jordan, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan. I'm studying industrial engineering, going for my bachelor's degree. I do have some experience with machine learning. I did a director research course with Dr. Vela in spring, so I got some knowledge there. For my internship, I was using Microsoft Access, so I have a little bit of knowledge of databases, just a tiny bit, but yeah.
All right. So Jordan is actually one of the folks that we tested out and started developing this course with. So I think he'll sort of know parts of the class, and other parts I think will be new to him. So I'm excited and happy he was able to help last spring in developing this course. Stephanie, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm a computer science student. I'm a graduate student. I have a bachelor's in computer science, so I'm pretty familiar with database systems and machine learning. I built applications from scratch, and I've done a lot of machine learning projects with CNN models and things of that nature.
Cool. All righty. And last up, we have Sebastian.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastian. Like Jordan, I was also part of the research kind of cohort last spring. I worked on the community detection kind of group, so a little bit different there. I got to see some experience through the program for research, and currently doing some internship work with databases and whatnot with SAP HANA at Lockheed Martin. So pretty fun so far.
Awesome. Thank you, Sebastian. Okay, so I'm excited that most of y'all are coming, especially the CS folks are coming with a really strong background in machine learning, right? So I think in that context, for y'all, I think most of the learning part for you guys is going to be more on sort of the modeling approaches, right? And when I say modeling, I mean modeling and sort of the operations research standpoint. And so we'll sort of go through this and what that means, right? Because I think as industrial engineers, or let's say operations research folks, we have a slightly different view than computer science of what modeling means and what it means to validate a model and stuff like that. So hopefully you'll take away something from that more than anything else. So I think probably for a few of you guys, you'll sort of be like, oh, random forest, I've seen that, or neural networks, I've sort of played around with that, which is great, right? So, you know, when you sort of come along with that material, I think you'll be able to sort of pick and choose what exactly you want to learn. So there'll be cases where I'll go through some of the mathematics behind it and why it works and how it works. If that's of interest to you, you know, go for it, right? But I'm going to assume that most of the CS cohorts, you guys have a lot of experience working with these different types of algorithms, and you have some background of hopefully when and why they are appropriate or not appropriate, right? But hopefully there'll still be opportunities for you guys to learn something new. So, all right, cool. So with that, I'll sort of kick off the class. And as I go through and give the lectures, again, it's going to be a little bit weird because one of the things that we're actually trying to do as part of this class is deploy this class a little bit more publicly, right? So just be aware that everything moving forward is going to be recorded. And much of it, and I sort of put this on I think I put this, oh, maybe I didn't. I might have done it from my other class. Basically, all these videos are going to go up on YouTube at some point. So And I do this for a variety of reasons. I do this for the students, but also this class is actually part of a funded grant from the Department of Homeland Security, which makes it super exciting. So anyways, with that, I'm going to get started. And so sort of the corollary to that is at some stages, you'll see sort of a black screen. That's done there on purpose. That's sort of me to like know, oh, this is like a video cut when I start editing everything up. So just be aware of that. Okay, so again, welcome to ESI5937. This is the modeling fanaticism using advanced industrial engineering techniques. I'm your instructor, Professor Vella from the Department of Industrial Engineering. All right. So fundamentally, I want to start by saying this isn't necessarily a machine learning course, and it's not necessarily a Homeland Security course. Really, this is a course on modeling, right? And what we're trying to do is understand how we can use statistical and machine learning techniques and sort of the models that they enable in combination with social media data in order to understand some of the problems related to Homeland Security. Now, this course is supported through the Department of Homeland Security by the NSITE, which is the, oh, I should look this up. I always forget what the acronym stands for. The National Counterterrorism, oh, I'm going to get this right the first time. All right, NSITE, let's see. National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center. So DHS basically funds researchers through centers of excellence. And NSITE is one of the centers of excellence that was recently awarded by DHS. Right. So if you want to learn more about NSITE, you can just Google them, and so it's NCITE, and it should, oh, I think I sent that directly to Shahab, NCITE, and you can actually learn a little bit more. And really what it is it's a consortium of researchers from, most of them are going to be in the social sciences, but there's a fair bit from sort of the technical side. So folks like us who are interested in understanding terrorism and basically how do we prevent it. Right? And so as part of NSITE, what we want to do is essentially introduce everybody to the Homeland Security enterprise and the role that engineers can play and computer scientists can play in understanding radicalization, extremism, and targeted violence. Okay, so in this context, again, we're going to be focusing more on the modeling side. So it's not a machine learning class per se, and it's not a social media class, and it's not specifically a Homeland Security class, right? It's sort of all these things combined into one. And really what we're trying to do is model the world around us, right? Okay, so what should you expect based on the sort of description of what I'm telling you? There's going to be sort of a mix of theory and application. So there'll be times where, I think one of the first lectures is we're going to talk about linear regression. I know everybody knows about linear regression, but we'll sort of go through a little bit of the derivation. But more so, we're going to focus and use linear regression as sort of a framework of how do we develop models, test models, and validate models. Okay. And the goal is that that framework will be applied later on throughout the class, right? So I think testing, training, and validation is something that is spoken about a little bit differently outside of industrial engineering, which is a little bit unfortunate. I think actually typically in the machine learning community, I think most of the folks who have taken machine learning, they talk about training, validation, and testing data sets. Where in operations research and modeling, we actually flip the definitions of what these are. And I'm a little bit unsure why the machine learning community has sort of chosen a different, let's say, vocabulary, but that's okay. Okay, so not only are we going to talk about the theory and application of some of these machine learning techniques, we're also going to cover sort of the technical and the social. All right. And so what I mean by that is not only will we cover these algorithms and cover databases, but we'll look at some of the social context in which we're applying them, right? So part of this will be, we're going to have a series of seminars from experts to come talk to the class. We have one who's a police chief and an expert in sovereign citizens. So sovereign citizens are sort of this weird movement within the United States that doesn't recognize the government. Most of it sort of derives from a disbelief of the taxation system, but really it goes much wider than that. And so they're sort of a little bit more radicalized, right? If somebody doesn't accept the US government, right, or government as a principle, it's a little bit problematic, right? So we'll have a speaker come in to talk about sovereign citizens. In the past, we had, last semester in the spring, we had a bunch of speakers come talk about the January 6th protests and sort of storming of the Capitol, right? We had a number of speakers come in to discuss sort of like what is this radicalization process? How is it different now than what we've seen in the past? It's actually quite interesting. In the past, we tended to have sort of extremists and radicals that were sort of centered around themes, right? So the argument is before we had religious radicals or anti-abortion radicals, anti-government radicals, or maybe racist radicals. And typically they sort of stood in their own camps. But increasingly we see that those divisions are a little bit artificial and people actually cross between these groups in multiple dimensions, right? So not just in terms of the vocabulary they use, but the tactics and beliefs that they have. So for example, it's not uncommon to see white nationalists that are also anti-government, which seems a little bit like an oxymoron, but it actually exists. So as part of this class, we'll sort of hope to get you guys a little bit integrated into some homeland security issues. All right. Okay. So ultimately, what we want you all to do is to take some of your knowledge in machine learning and apply it to some interesting questions, right? So the big one, some just example questions will be like, will somebody radicalize, right? Now, in the context of this class, because we're using Reddit, which, radicalization is a little bit, you're not going to see it so much, although it does exist on Reddit. We might have to use a different definition of radicalize. So radicalize won't necessarily mean like radicalize to some violent ideology. It could mean radicalize to, let's say, some political belief, right? So maybe somebody starts off as like, oh, I'm kind of a Democrat, I usually vote Democrat. And then somehow they end up with like a total Bernie bro, right? Where, Joe Biden's the worst candidate ever, and I'll only support Bernie Sanders, and anything short of Bernie Sanders is terrible, right? In this sense, even though I think, let's say Bernie Sanders fits within the acceptable political spectrum in that it's nonviolent, we can still sort of view this radicalization process, right? So don't think of radicalization as necessarily a bad thing. In a similar way, we could talk about somebody radicalizes from just kind of liking football to being like a hardcore UCF fan that paints themselves up and goes to every game, right? So I think these are the types of ways we want to talk about radicalization. As part of the class, we'll do some natural language processing. And so we could ask questions like, what is a patriot, right? So I think we all have this dictionary definition of what a patriot could be, right? But certainly we've seen that word be redefined recently, right? Through, this Proud Boys movement and maybe some of the more right-wing sort of at the fringes, we see the word patriot come up quite a bit more than before. Previously the equivalent sort of word would be like snowflakes, So the idea, oops, actually let me add a question here or a comment. So the equivalent would also be like snowflakes. Like obviously a snowflake is sort of like the weather phenomenon, but certainly it was a word that was introduced within more conservative circles, and then actually in some ways reappropriated by the left. You know, I think it's sort of an interesting way that we've seen vocabulary shift. And so what we'll sort of, one of the goals of the class is, can we identify this shift, right? Certainly there are more traditional questions like, can we identify hate speech, right? So lots of work has existed in this area. Another sort of research question we might be able to ask and answer through the analysis of social media is, how pervasive is hate on websites like Reddit? And in fact, we did a baseline study of hate on Reddit, and that's actually what sort of developed this class. So about a year or two ago, I was looking at Reddit data, and I found out that by analyzing this one particular subreddit called incels, right? So there's now a banned subreddit or a banned community, that the people on a particular subreddit that was a little bit extreme and misogynist, almost, yeah, we'll just say misogynist, they actually, those users that posted on that subreddit were more than twice as likely to post in non-extreme subreddits. So they are more than twice as likely to post in the funny subreddit or the tennis subreddit or the baseball subreddit. And this was really shocking for us, right? That folks who held extreme views might actually overrepresent the users that are commenting on Reddit, right? And so what this tells us is, you know, Reddit and the comments and the content that is on it is not representative of the average user, but is actually potentially disproportionately representative of some of the more extreme beliefs on Reddit. And so this was a bit surprising for us. And so I think these are the types of research questions that we can ask. We have a question from Stephanie. And so I think the question that she brought up, I'm not sure if you guys can see the chat on my screen, or you guys could probably see it on yours. And the question is, how much machine learning will we be learning, I think, more or less. So I think fundamentally, we're gonna, you know, based on everybody's knowledge, we're gonna sort of select a few different machine learning techniques and statistical learning techniques that ideally I'd like to introduce as many new ones as possible to everybody. Definitely we'll do some random forest regression and classification. I love random forest mostly because it's sort of I like to call it a dummy hammer or a stupid hammer. It almost works for everything. It's absolutely surprising for a lot of regression and classification problems. It sort of can take data in, and it always manages to outperform a lot of other algorithms, right? We're definitely going to do some natural language processing, and we'll probably do some hidden Markov modeling. I think these are the three we definitely want to do. As part of the natural language processing, we'll also include some neural network models and stuff like that. But I'm certainly open to adjusting. So based on interest, we can adjust. And the idea is, if you know these algorithms, great, you know, but if not, then this is definitely an opportunity for you guys to learn, you know, how these algorithms work and when they should be applied and when they work well or don't work well. So Stephanie, I hope that answered your question. Is that sufficient, or would you like me to go into a little bit more depth? Okay, I'm gonna, oh, let's see, she put it in the chat. Yes, thank you, awesome, okay. All right, so here goes that little break that I was telling you about. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do in this class is we're going to talk about Reddit. So in the chat, can you guys give me an idea of how many of you guys actually are active users on Reddit or have visited the site? So just put, a yes if you know Reddit and use it quite a bit, a no if you've never really played around with it or heard it. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. All right, cool. So has anybody not worked with it? So it seems like Shahab, he put a smiley face. I don't know if I believe him or not. So it seems like most of us know Reddit, which sort of makes sense because Reddit is actually the #7 site in the US, according to Alexa rankings, and it's 19th in the world, at least according to the rankings that I last looked at I think they covered the last 90 days, right? So for those of you who don't know, Reddit's sort of tagline is it's the front page of the internet. Reddit comes from a long line of news aggregation websites that existed before it and sort of online forums. The first one its predecessor was Dig. I think this is probably before most of yours times, but for me, I was a big Dig user back in the day. And then Reddit sort of came out, right? So Dig was very similar, where people could submit links, and if you liked the link or not, you would dig it, right? And that would be like an upvote. And then you could also comment on it. So you can sort of see this is on the lower left-hand slide, this is sort of what Dig looked like, right, back in the day. I think Dig still exists as a website. It's not nearly as successful as it used to be. They made a number of changes to the website at one point that made it, let's say, a bit more ad heavy and commercialized, I guess. And that sort of created a few different pushes towards Reddit, right? The other thing about Dig is that it never, even though it was this news aggregation site, it lacked one feature that Reddit did have, which was subreddits or these sub communities. So everybody on Dig more or less had the same view. This would later on change, but by the time it changed, Reddit had taken over as sort of the primary news aggregation site, right? Now, again, Reddit sort of follows this long line of social media where differing from traditional media, right? In traditional media, the producers of the content are those media organizations like Fox or CNN, right? They produce the media, they put it on their website, right? So Reddit's a little bit different, where it's the users of the website who are actually posting the content or sharing the content, right? So in this way, it's similar to a long line of other social media sites. I grew up with Friendster and MySpace before Facebook came out. Certainly nowadays, I think a lot of folks use different social media websites like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat. And so we have a whole lot of variety. In the chat, could you guys tell me what sort of social, even LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is social media in its own way. Could you guys give me an idea of what social media you guys use these days? So just go ahead and put like what your favorite, maybe two, if it's just one, if it's like two or three, if you could put that in the chat, like, are you guys on TikTok? Do you guys have your own YouTube channels? So where are you guys either consuming or producing content? Let's see. Instagram, LinkedIn. Okay, yeah. Oh, Twitter, that's right. I always forgot about Twitter. Yeah. So I think for me, the new one has been TikTok, which is certainly unique, right? I'm waiting to figure out what the next new social media website is, right? But yeah, I think these are all sort of interesting. So now these sites are very interesting to researchers because they're sort of reflective of emerging let's say, sentiment or beliefs within the community, right? You know, and they're interesting in the sense that before, you know, in order to get a sense of what people were thinking, you had to go out into the world and do surveys, right? And, you know, depending on who you talk to and the types of, you know, let's say sociological studies you did, you got different sort of responses, right? At this point, researchers love things like Twitter, right? And Reddit, because it really gives you an inside view of subjects that we traditionally did not get the opportunity to observe, right? And sort of their beliefs. Now, there are certainly substantial issues with this, right? So I think we can all acknowledge that how people communicate on social media is not necessarily how they communicate in the world, right? So, you know, and we sort of see this in text messages, right? You text somebody, they interpret it the wrong way, and all of a sudden it goes from like, oh, everything's nice and pleasant to just really crude, mean humor, right? Or statements, just whatever it might be. And so you know, I think we always have this issue of are sites like Reddit and Facebook actually representative of what's going on in the real world? Or more so, I think if you've watched the social media documentary, does social media sort of create, right, what exists in the real world, right? And I think that's an even more interesting question, right? So, so again, this is Reddit. I think most of us have used it and played with it. On the right, I think you can see like a little, I think there was an animation of, you can see some of the comments. I have no idea. I think this was like a funny video of a horse or something like that. So, oh yeah, so you can see Reddit, me going through. But again, most of you have worked with the Reddit website. So by now, hopefully you've seen that before. Okay. All right, so, you know, Reddit is absolutely, in some ways, a community for everyone and everything. So Reddit is subdivided into these subreddits. You can usually access these different communities by just typing in www.reddit.com/r/ and then whatever the name of the subreddit is. And each of these subreddits, you know, most of them are sort of special interest group, although there are some sort of umbrella ones that everybody sort of likes. And so on the right, you can actually see here we have this website, redditlist.com, that does sort of a statistical analysis for different subreddits, right? So here you can see the most popular subreddits under the subscriber by number of subscribers is funny, Ask Reddit, gaming, awe, music, pics, world news, science, and today I learned. And in fact, I think most of these are the default subreddits that you get, right? You know, people do all sorts of analysis of like which ones are growing the fastest, which one has the most amount of recent activity by posts and stuff like that. Certainly one that's been interesting lately is Wall Street Bets. I think last spring we had a bunch of students who were sort of, you know, and myself included, who got sort of really engaged with Wall Street Bets, made a lot of money and lost a lot of money, and that was a lot of fun, right? But certainly, you know, I think one thing that's worth noting is really the diversity of these subreddits is all over the place, right? And so we can even see this in the growth of these sort of like on the right-hand column, we can see a bunch of subreddits that, you know, let's say ranked by growth, right? And of course, you see this, you know, Herman Cain Award, you know, COD, I guess Call of Duty Vanguard, right? Humankind the Game. You know, the reality is I have no idea what most of these are, right? But these are very niche communities in many ways, right? And these communities actually sort of vary all over the place in how accessible they are, right? So, you know, some of these are public, certainly some are private, where you have to be, you submit to join and then they sort of review you. And some of them are restricted, right? So some of them folks are not allowed to comment, but they can peruse, right? They can view the subreddit. And so they're sort of interesting. You know, and even within each subreddit, users can have like their own little flair, right? That sort of defines who they are in the community. One of my favorite subreddits is this professor subreddit. So I'm gonna go ahead and open it. And there's actually one that I'm a member of. So can you guys see the web page loading up? Let's see. Yep. All right. Thanks. Cool. Okay. So, you know, this is my little professor subreddit, right? And, you know, professors come to rant and complain about all sorts of things. And you can see there's, you know, flair for the posts, but there's also flair for members, right? So let's see if we can click one. So here, this SciProf-Toronto is a user on this professor subreddit. And you can see they added a little bit of flair about themselves. So they're an assistant professor, they do science and big research in Canada, right? And so this is sort of neat how everybody can sort of add in a little bit of flair about the post or about themselves, right? So this guy's 70% teaching and physics, right? So there's always a little bit of fun to sort of read in, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's certainly a lot of nice, fun stuff on subreddit. So my question is, have any of you guys seen the not so fun stuff on subreddit? You know, for me, I didn't quite realize how bad some content on Reddit could be, right? But it actually gets pretty bad, right? So I think we can, you know, so we have two cases here that sort of span what I would consider from not necessarily terrible or harmful to potentially harmful, right? So I'm not really sure how you want to put it, right? So this first one, there's a 9/11 Truth subreddit where, you know, I haven't entered it. I'm not going to review it. This is a quarantine subreddit, and I'm fairly certain it's a 9/11 sort of denier subreddit community. And so this is one that's quarantined and as you can read it here, that it might contain a high degree of misinformation, right? And so when you try to visit, you know, the 9/11 Truth, you sort of get welcome to this warning page, right? And then you can either continue or not continue. You know, now I'm not necessarily going to say that this 9/11 Truth is violent. I mean, from my belief, it's not, but I'm not really sure. But certainly, it's outside what I think is the mainstream accepted knowledge, right? So, so we'll sort of leave it at that. You know, on the right here, this is actually a screenshot from a subreddit that used to exist called White Beauty. And actually, this existed a year ago, and I was a little bit surprised to see that it had been taken down because I was wondering how it was even allowed to exist in the first place. Essentially, White Beauty was a subreddit where people would post pictures of white people and then comment essentially on how beautiful and great white people are. So essentially, it was a white supremacist subreddit. But it actually did not get banned for quite a long time because nothing about it was necessarily divisive, in the sense that typically the language that was used in the posts and the language that was used in the comments wasn't terrible, right? So like, you know, they didn't advocate for hate, they didn't advocate for violence, but, you know, it was sort of this white people are great and white people are beautiful, right? So it sort of skirted the boundary of what was acceptable. So in that context, I'm a little bit surprised that it got banned, but you could certainly see, if you can read the comments, I think some of the comments there certainly harbored, you Yeah, so a lot of dog whistling, right? I think that's a good way to put it, right? So, as sort of a warning to the class, this is the type of stuff we're going to cover, right? So just fair warning, we'll cover stuff that some of it will be blatantly racist, some of it will be blatantly xenophobic, some of it will be blatantly misogynistic, right? So just be prepared to see that sort of content, right? So this class, I think for the most part, is focused or will have a strong focus on some of this stuff, right? With that, I want to sort of, people keep track of some of these subreddits that have been banned or quarantined or are controversial. And so let me see if we can get some of these links to load up. Oops, what the... It's not loading. Oh, control click to follow. Let's see if we can do that. Okay. There we go. All right. So Wikipedia, I mean, they don't do a really good job. I mean, this doesn't get updated all the time. This list grows very, very quickly, right? So they have a pretty good list of like very famous subreddits that ended up getting banned, and none of them are for terrible reasons, right? Well, the ones that I'm going to say that sort of pop up here were for terrible reasons, right? So the incel movement was a big movement for involuntarily celibate men, I guess. It's sort of a misogynistic, depending on how you viewed it, misogynistic subreddit that sort of glorified and I think promoted some pretty nasty things. So I think promoted rape, or let's say assault on women, or would justify rape and assaulting women. That sort of content was on there. There was a lot of celebration of one particular case in San Diego where a gentleman who was a celibate went around San Diego shooting men and women he considered Ken and Stacy's, which were like the women who denied him sex, and men who were sort of like the popular jocks or something like that. This incel movement sort of celebrated it, right? But then you have some that maybe had good intent, right? So you can see a whole bunch of these, right? So clearly are not particularly good. There are these deep fakes. For those of you who don't know, deep fakes are sort of using AI techniques to, it says it right, superimpose other people into videos. Typically, they were pornographic. I think one of the ones that sort of was very interesting is this Find the Boston Bombers, right? So one of the reasons I got into this DHS sort of sphere is because I was actually living in Boston during the Boston bombing, the marathon bombing, which is actually, it was very scary, right? So they ended up finding the bombers just a couple miles from my house. And I remember being on lockdown for quite a while, right? Additionally, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I've sort of, been exposed to terrorism and sort of violent ideology just by the nature of living in DC, right? So at one point we had, my high school had Bill Clinton and Tony Blair come give a speech, and that seemed to upset quite a few people. We've had bomb threats at my high school. It was a public school, a normal school. My parents' work have had a number of bomb threats for people. Think, my mother used to work at the U.S. Institute of Peace, and a library that sort of did a lot of work with the government, and people would always call in and claim that the government was hiding information from them, and they would call in bomb threats, right? So, this has always been deeply troubling for me, and that's why I sort of got involved with some of this research. But for those of you who don't know, the marathon bombing in Boston was sort of this turning point for Reddit, right? So people wanted to crowdsource finding the bomber, right? Because at the Boston Marathon, there a lot of people were taking pictures and whatnot. And one of these pictures led to sort of a doxing, right? A public outing of somebody who had nothing to do with the Boston Marathon bombing, right? And it unfortunately, I think, created a lot of distress, right? And so this was one of the cases, right? It was very unfortunate. So even though it wasn't necessarily, let's say, misogynistic or hate-filled or violent, its impact was quite, unsettling, let's put it that way, right? So nowadays, Reddit has very strong policies on doxing or outing people, right? But you can see a bunch of these, right? So a lot of them, that ended up getting banned were sort of for illegal content, right? You're not allowed to sell guns on the internet, right? Well, you can within some context, right? But and then there was jailbait, which was, underage pornography or closely linked to it, right? And there's all sorts of stuff that got banned. Of course, the Pizzagate one is very interesting. I would love it if somebody wanted to do some work on Pizzagate and sort of this sort of work. A recent one is the Donald, right? So the Donald was a subreddit that supported Donald Trump, right? So, so all sorts of stuff that were certainly banned from Reddit or controversial. And again, there's also this idea of being quarantined. People do keep, let's see if we can do it, lists of sort of quarantine subreddits. Again, one of them was this 9/11 Truth. You can see a lot of these over time end up becoming banned, right? Or I guess in this one, unquarantined. So this is interesting. I've never seen this, the anti-vaccine one. I'm interested to see if this is still the case, that it's unbanned, right? Oh, there we go, unquarantined. Wow. So this is interesting.
Everybody get up.
Oops, sorry, my computer's starting to overheat, I think. Okay. All right. Yeah, so we can see a lot of content sort of spans the gambit, right, on Reddit, right? Okay, so we now have this idea of Reddit, how it has some really cool stuff for professors like me or students like you. There's a UCF subreddit, right? There's a machine learning subreddit. You can learn all sorts of stuff, but at the same time, there are some very, very terrible subreddits. Okay. Oops, and okay, so you're going to have to forgive me. I need to do something real quick. My computer is starting to overheat. So let me see if I can adjust some settings. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm probably not going to go to any more web pages as much. Okay, so we have all sorts of content where we can learn about these subreddits. One of the interesting parts is not only is, the subreddits, for the vast majority, they tend to be public, right? It's a social media website. A lot of these subreddits want to be easily accessible, right? So they don't want to be private. There are some interesting ones like Black Twitter, and there are some lawyer subreddits and stuff like that that require verification. But for the most part, that's not the norm, right? Most of it's very public. Along with this, Reddit users and their profiles, while anonymous, are not private, right? So you could learn a lot about a person, which is a bit scary, right? So, here I just picked a random user, ThinkFire, right? And, you can go to ThinkFire's user page, and you can see how many karma points or upvotes they have when they started their account. You can essentially see every post and comment they've ever made. You can see all sorts of stuff like, are they a moderator on any of the subreddits, right? Have they won any awards, right? And this is a little bit surprising because certainly you can sort of potentially figure out who somebody is if you go through their profile enough, right? Certainly, you know, I have a Reddit profile that I'm pretty easy to figure out who I am based on the comments that I make, right? So with some basic knowledge, right? So I'm active on the professor subreddit and I'm active on the UCF subreddit, and that in itself, you can more or less, you know, figure out who I am. This is an excellent area of study for those of you who ever get into differential privacy. So differential privacy is a great sort of field to get into in big data. So the idea is if you have multiple data sets, how do you maintain privacy, right? Is there a way to do it, right? Because usually with just a few pieces of information, you can figure out almost everything about a person, right? So the classic example of this is if you know the birthday and I think what state they're born in and name of a person, you can almost guess their social security number pretty dang closely, right? And if you have the last 4 digits, you can essentially reconstruct somebody's social security number, right? So there's a great area of research. Now, we're not going to focus on it, but you know, I think it's a lot of fun. Now, it's worth noting that even though all this information is on somebody's subreddit page, some of this information is not like bidirectional, right? So I think this sort of gets at this idea of privacy, right? You can see sometimes the information in one direction, but not the other. So for example, I can't see what subreddits somebody is a part of, and I don't necessarily always see their flair. But if I go to where they've made comments on the subreddit and I look at their comments, then I can find their flair, right? The one big thing you don't see is you don't see their upvotes. So, you know, if you go to somebody's user page, you can't see what content they gave an upvote or a downvote for, which is a little bit, you know, I think it's a little bit interesting because it's essentially trying to maintain some level of privacy or anonymity, right, of beliefs. But essentially, I think you can still extract those beliefs from what they're posting or what their comments are. But nonetheless. So the great part is there's a ton of Reddit data, okay? Reddit has a very generous terms of service that allows for data scraping using their API, right? Because of that, a number of sort of Reddit analysis websites have popped up. The big one being PushShift.io, right? So what some gentlemen did is they basically every month download everything from Reddit and they post the files online, okay? So that you can access it. Right? They also have their own API where you can call it and access the data. There's all these other websites like Reddit, Meetus, or delayforreddit.com, goes on and on and on and on. So the animation you're seeing on the right is, I think I took the same user and I typed his username into Reddit Meetus, I guess that's how you pronounce it, .com, and it gives you a whole profile of the user, right? So you can see some of the figures have to do with when they're posting. You know, here you can see what sort of word they're using and stuff like that, right? So it's really interesting. Delay for Reddit. It's an interesting website. I think it's trying to commercialize sort of Reddit analysis. So it's basically trying to tell you like when you should post content in order for it to go viral, right? And of course, you can expect a lot of companies are trying to commercialize analyzing Reddit data, right? But we're going to be working directly with the Reddit data that was acquired by this PushShift.io. You can actually see they have a lot of other Reddit or a lot of other social media data from SoundCloud, Stack Exchange, TikTok. I don't think they have the videos. I haven't quite gone through it. Gab was another website that at one point was a bit extremist or had some extremist content. We actually, as part of our research, we have some other data, which includes Iron March, which was an online white nationalist forum. So we have all the data there. If anybody's interested in doing an analysis on some white nationalist forums, right? There's another very famous leak that occurred. What was it? That we have access to as well, but it's not coming to the top of my head. But nonetheless, we have a bunch of these different sort of social media data that's accessible. Okay, so, oops. Okay. So how do we access this data? So I think there are two good ways of accessing and analyzing the Reddit data. So one of them is through Google Cloud. They have something called Bigtable. And again, this pushshift.io uploaded all the data. Okay, so you can access it. Now, the only issue with this is it costs money to access the data. So if you're doing it all the time, it's not always worth it. So what we did for my research lab is we've actually downloaded all the pushshift files and we've uploaded them to a MongoDB database. And so a lot of this class is going to discuss, how do we connect to this database, doing different sorts of queries, and then getting the data to actually do some research projects. All right, so hopefully this gives you a good idea of, Reddit. Oops, let's see, I'm gonna try to stop the share. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of the Reddit. Ooh, what did I do here? Sorry, my computer's overheating, so it's a little bit troubling. Gives you a good idea of Reddit and some of the content that's available, okay? So with that, I think I wanna sort of open it up to y'all. If you have any questions or comments about Reddit, I'd love to hear it, or what you guys would like to get out of this class. If there's any particular interest you have, then I think now's a good time to sort of discuss it. But again, we'll sort of, I think if you want to think about the structure of the class, what we're going to be doing is learning a few different machine learning algorithms and find neat ways of how we can apply these machine learning algorithms to this particular data set in order to answer an interesting research question. Okay. So with that, I'm pretty much done talking for today's lecture. So please feel free to speak up, ask a question. Oops. And yeah, I'll stop talking. So the floor is open. And I ask if you could unmute yourself to ask the question, because at this point I can no longer use my mouse to click on the chat button.
Hi, Professor. I had a question. Could you go into a little more detail about the kinds of guest speakers that we're going to be having for the class? Do you have them all lined up, or?
No, so we're still working on them. One of the grad student, Ravi, is looking to get the guest speakers, but I can certainly give you an idea of who has presented in the past. So if you go to, so if you go to this webpage, and unfortunately I can't do it right now because, like I said, my computer's overheating. You can see some of the speakers that we've had in the past. So Peter Simi is a nationally recognized expert in extremism. So he gave a talk on trends in right-wing extremism. You can see the YouTube video there. We also had Shannon Hawk come speak. So she is a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, and she's also interested in, let's say, right-wing anti-government extremism. So not necessarily right-wing, but she does right and left, but anti-government. And so she gave a pretty interesting talk on QAnon. Later, we had a speaker, Giselle Beechler, who studies criminal justice. And, she's coming at it from a bit more of a social science background, but she applies some graph theory to her work. Graph theory is a little bit weird. It doesn't work out as well as you would think in Homeland Security studies. So normally for those of you who have studied graph theory, especially in social media, usually people use graph theory to sort of analyze like who is the central node, right? Who is the influencer? Who's connected to who, right? But in terrorism studies and Homeland Security studies, we actually have a completely different problem, right? So usually their problem is we have 5 known actors, right? We might have a leader, we might have a financier, we might have the foot soldiers, we might have the people who, let's say, transport the material, but we don't know who the people are that provide the material, right? So we don't know who's actually acquiring the C4, right, to build a bomb, right? So usually the traditional graph problem that we have in Homeland Security is sort of figuring out, well, we recognize that there are these standard graph networks that exist within organizations that are doing terrorist or extremist acts. Who's missing from that graph? What node is missing? And so it's a little bit of a different problem that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to machine learning techniques. But again, she had a very interesting talk, I think. We had somebody from the Department of Justice coming from the National Institute of Justice. She was a social scientist analyst, quite interesting. Her name was Aisha Qureshi. She gave a quick talk. Unfortunately, her talk is not accessible because, for government folks, it's sort of hard to get releases on their talk to be rebroadcast. So we don't have that, unfortunately. And then we had Katrina Doxey. She worked at a think tank or works at a think tank. And you can see her talk that's up. Again, it's on extremism and measuring trends. And finally, we had Chip Coldren. He's actually center director for an organization called CNA. He wasn't able to speak. We're hoping to get him lined up for this semester. So traditionally, most of the speakers will not be, let's say, highly technical in nature. They tend to come more for the social sciences. And we do try to get a diversity of speakers. So in our case, I think I mentioned, we're going to have a police chief who is actually the former police chief of UCF. He's an expert in sovereign citizens. His name is Mead, I think. Let's see, Brett Mead. So interesting guy. He's now working in another city in Florida where he's police chief, but he's going to come talk to us. So he's sort of in the field, right? So he'll give an in the field perspective of sovereign citizens. But I think most of the folks will be, we'll probably have 2 or 3 researchers in the social sciences. And we might get 1 technical person, and we'll probably get somebody from DHS to come speak to us. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. You mentioned previously that there's kind of a chicken or the egg situation going on with social networks. I wanted to ask, through your research, do you believe that society changes because of the way we process information? Or do you think our information processing is changing because of society, the way society is changing? Or is it a reinforcing loop between both?
I am not the person, as an operations research person, I'm not the person to ask. I think that's a fascinating psychological question, right? We're like, so you're saying how we consume and process information, has that changed, right?
Yeah, is it changing because our society is changing, or is our society changing because of how we consume information?
I think this is a fascinating question. And one, I think I would enjoy if we could take a minor part of this and ask, right? So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So one of the students involved with this project, we're going to be developing natural language models to understand how these models vary across political ideology. Okay, so the idea is the language model that we see in the center different from, let's say, center left, center right, more on the boundaries of the left, boundaries on the right, right? So I think we should expect that the language models will be different, right? And so, if let's say we start with that as a hypothesis, right? That the sort of the language models for each of these communities is a little bit different. We can ask that. I think what you're sort of stating might ask the question of how have these language models evolved with time, right? So I think an excellent question that I would love for somebody to ask and address as a part of this class is, let's take a subreddit like r/conservative, right? So I think this is a great one because they have a pretty rich history on Reddit, right? So they have, I think, 100 times more comments than r/liberal, right? So I think that's sort of neat. Looking at r/conservative and asking, how has the language changed of this subreddit over time?
Yeah, I was thinking of kind of using like a Bayesian update, like a backward Bayesian update, see like what point in time has that change occurred, and see like what caused that change.
Exactly. So I think these are like exactly the types of questions we would like to address in the class, right? So I think you asked the big question. We're probably not well suited to answer it, right? Because I think it's a very powerful question, right? And this is where we want to get to. But our goal will be to sort of frame a smaller question that leads towards answering it, right?
Yeah, of course.
I think that's a wonderful question. And I want to encourage the exchange that we're having now, right? So a lot of this course, it's not about me lecturing about material. As a modeling class, it's really about how do we define a model to answer the research question, right? And I think a lot of that, learning how to do that, is going to require a back and forth and a discussion, right? Between what is the question, what are we really asking, how do we get to it? And so that's what I'd like to encourage more of as part of this class, right? With that, I think it's, I haven't gone into the syllabus, and unfortunately, like I said, my computer is overheating, which is highly problematic. But I think one thing that I think we should cover as part of this lecture is quickly, expectations, right? So, this is going to be a project-based course. There will be a number of small assignments for everybody to do, and mostly it's for baselining everybody, right? So the first set of assignments is just getting connected to our MongoDB database, right? And I need everybody to start doing that today. So if you can go to the, take some time today and go to the subreddit, or not the subreddit, sorry, the module Getting Connected. There's about 10 different steps that you need to go through, and each one of them takes a couple days. So please start going through that process. Let me see. I don't doubt this is going to work. Okay. I want to encourage everybody to start going through that process as soon as possible. Okay. And because what that will do is that will allow you to start accessing the database, and we can start, moving on to sort of the looking at the data, understanding what we can learn, understanding how machine learning, what the machine learning techniques we are going to be learning, how they apply. And I think, sort of the research question. So please today, after you leave, start that getting started process, right? I think a lot of you from CS might have done some of this. So like getting your VPN established, getting a whole bunch of software established, accounts on Eustace. I don't know if you guys do that or not. You're going to have to email a guy named Steve Dick in the IT department in order to get a bunch of accounts on our servers. And all these things take time. So please go ahead and do that. And so a lot of anyway, the whole point of this, a lot of the assignments are mostly like, hey, let's get this done, right? Okay, let's make sure everybody understands how do we apply random forest, or how do we develop these language models and stuff like that. The homework assignments, I'm not looking to particularly, grade toughly. I think the idea is, yes, you know how to do basic work. Really, the focus of this class is on developing a research project, right? So if this research project is a natural extension of what you already do within your research, fine. But I think in the end, that's what we really want to focus on. So there will be no exams in this class, and the homework assignments are not intended to be time intensive, okay? Really what we're trying to do is build towards giving you the skills, if you don't have them, to completing a research project with this data set. So that's sort of the end product that you guys will be submitting. Any other questions? All righty, I guess if that's it, then we're going to wrap up. Again, please start going through the module for getting connected. And in fact, there's an assignment due on the 31st, and basically it's, the goal is to get you guys connected with our databases, right? And getting, Studio 3T installed and all this stuff. So please go ahead and do that. And again, I'll try to post all these videos and everything online so that you can watch them if you need to. All right, with that, I want to thank you all for attending our first lecture. The lecture next week will also be over Zoom. I'll actually be traveling at that time. And so that's why we're going to be doing it over Zoom. If you do want to show up in person, the week of on the 8th, I will be giving a lecture from UCF. So you're more than invited to come sit in on that if you'd like to have a discussion. If you want to do it over Zoom, that's perfectly acceptable as well. Again, I think the basic request is that if you do come in person, please wear a mask. And definitely we're going to sort of respect everybody's personal boundaries of your fellow students in the classroom. So by default, we're going to have like a 6-foot rule in the room. And, the assumption is you will follow that, right? So we'll sort of leave it at that, right? But you guys are certainly welcome to come to lecture if you'd like. Okay, if there are no more questions, then we'll wrap up lecture and feel free to leave the meeting. And that's it. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.